It was Christmas morning, and the air was filled with the soft glow of holiday lights. But in the Miller household, something was missing. The laughter, the warmth, the joy of the season, they were all absent. Instead, an empty gift box sat at the heart of the room, a silent symbol of the distance between family members. For little Lily, this Christmas would be different. A gift she never expected would change everything. But would it be enough to heal the wounds of a broken family? Let's find out. The story begins here. It was Christmas morning at the Miller household, the living room bathed in the soft glow of twinkling lights on the Christmas tree. The smell of pine filled the air, yet the warmth of the season was nowhere to be found. The family sat together in the silence, the laughter and cheer that usually filled these gatherings absent, replaced instead by a chilly distance. Lily Evans, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, sat beneath the tree, her little hands eagerly tearing at the bright wrapping paper of her gift. Her face lit up with excitement, her eyes sparkling with hope. But as the paper fell away and the box was opened, her expression shifted. Inside there was nothing, just an empty cardboard box. She stared at it in disbelief, her small fingers searching inside, desperately hoping for something, anything to appear. Frank Miller, Lily's grandfather, sat in a large armchair across the room, watching her with cold, indifferent eyes. He let out a brief, mocking laugh and broke the silence with a biting remark. "What a gift! Nothing inside? Guess it wasn't worth waiting for," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. His words cut through the room, and his gaze never left his whiskey glass. Lily remained silent. She didn't cry, though her heart ached with disappointment. Her small hands clutched the empty box tightly, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she sat still, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. The room was thick with tension, no one daring to speak after Frank's cruel comment. Sandra Miller, Sarah's sister, didn't help the situation. She glanced up from her phone just long enough to add her own barb. "Just like her mother," she muttered under her breath, always expecting handouts, no surprise there. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, the silence almost suffocating. Sarah Evans, Lily's mother, sat beside her, looking at her daughter with sympathy, but also a deep sense of helplessness. She wanted to comfort Lily, to stand up to her father, but the words caught in her throat. She had spent so many years trying to keep the peace with Frank that now it felt impossible to change anything. Later that afternoon, the family gathered around the dining table for Christmas lunch, but the festive cheer that usually came with the holiday was nowhere to be found. The table was set simply, the food abundant, but there was no joy. The room felt cold, and the weight of the earlier incident still lingered in the air. Sarah sat beside her daughter, her heart heavy. She looked at Frank, who was silently picking at his food, his demeanor unchanged. He had never been a man of many words, but today his silence felt sharper than usual. He didn't ask how Lily was doing, nor did he show any interest in the holiday beyond the meal in front of him. For Sarah, the reality of her relationship with her father was difficult to ignore. Over the years, the bond had worn thin. Every interaction with him felt like a reminder of the emotional distance between them, a gap that had only grown wider since her divorce. Today was no different. His coldness stung, especially now as she watched Lily struggle to hold herself together. But Sarah couldn't find the strength to confront him, the decades of emotional neglect weighing too heavily on her. The relationship between Sarah and Frank had always been strained, but now it felt like it was permanently fractured. She thought back to her own childhood, to the times Frank had been emotionally distant, critical, and harsh. Those memories resurfaced now as she saw him dismiss Lily in the same way he had once dismissed her. Sandra, sitting across the table, didn't offer any comfort. She had never been one to bridge the emotional gaps in the family, and today was no different. Her attention was consumed by her phone, and her disinterest in Lily's hurt was palpable. Lily, sensing the lack of care from both her mother's side and her aunt, felt herself becoming smaller. She sat quietly, barely touching her food, her gaze lost in thought. She didn't know where to turn for comfort. Her family, once a source of warmth and safety, now felt like a cold, foreign place. The meal continued in uncomfortable silence. No one made eye contact, no one smiled. Even the Christmas music playing softly in the background did little to break the tension. Sarah tried to keep the appearance of normalcy, but inside she was breaking. She didn't know how to fix what was broken. The love that once tied them all together seemed to have vanished, leaving only fragments of what had been. The living room was still, the Christmas tree shining brightly with its lights, but there was a chill in the air. The festive warmth that typically filled the room was absent. Lily Evans sat quietly near the tree, clutching the only gift she had, the one she had been most excited to receive. She didn't want to show it, but in her young heart a storm of emotions was brewing. Everyone else in the room seemed to be lost in their own world. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was offering anything. After the earlier incident with the empty gift, Lily had retreated into herself. Her small hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. She didn't say a word as she stared at the drawing, her eyes focused and calm, but there was a flicker of hesitation. This was her moment to do something for her grandfather, to offer him something that might reach beyond the walls he had built around himself. Lily walked slowly over to Frank, the stern figure sitting across the room. With a gentle voice, almost a whisper, she said, "I made this for you, Grandpa." The entire room fell into silence, everyone watching with a mix of curiosity and confusion. The gesture, so small and unassuming, carried a weight that no one could have expected. Frank took the piece of paper from her without a word, his expression unreadable. He unfolded the drawing and looked at it, his lips curling into a brief, cynical smile. "What is this? What are you drawing here?" he mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But then, as he studied the picture, his smirk faltered. The drawing was simple, but it carried a tenderness that hit him in a way he hadn't felt in years. It was a picture of Frank holding hands with his late wife, Lily's grandmother, standing together with the whole family by the Christmas tree. The moment, one he had long forgotten, came rushing back. For a long moment, Frank just stared at the picture. The usual hardness in his gaze softened, and there was something in his eyes that no one had seen for a long time. A flicker of emotion, a reminder of something lost. He didn't speak, nor did he mock her further. His silence hung in the air, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't cold, it wasn't dismissive. It was a silence full of memories and regret. Sandra and Mary exchanged looks, puzzled by Frank's reaction, but they said nothing. The room was still, and Lily sat down again, watching Frank, not rushing him to respond. She understood this was a moment, not for immediate answers, but for something deeper, a bridge, however fragile, that she had quietly placed between them. Chapter 4. A Change Begins. The silence in the room was now thick and heavy, settling over everyone like a blanket. After a long moment of contemplation, Frank placed the drawing gently down on the table. He stood up without a word and slowly walked out of the room. His movement was deliberate, unhurried, but his departure left behind a noticeable shift in the air. No one spoke. No one knew how to react to this subtle change, this unexpected moment of vulnerability from the man who had always been so distant. Sarah sat there, her eyes following her father's figure as he left. A part of her wanted to reach out, to say something, to acknowledge the change she was seeing in him, but she remained still. There was a new kind of tension in the air, but it wasn't the same kind that had plagued their family for years. It was different now. The usual strain was there, but underneath it there was a thread of something new. Possibility. Lily remained silent, her small hands folded in her lap as she tried to understand what had just happened. Her heart beat a little faster, unsure of what was to come, but there was a lightness in her chest. She had done something simple, but something that mattered. It was the first time in a long while that she had truly believed her actions might bring about a change, even if it was small. The room was still, the weight of the moment lingering in the space where Frank had once sat. Sandra, ever detached, avoided eye contact with Sarah and Lily. Her disinterest was as palpable as it had been throughout the day, but even she seemed to recognize that something had shifted. Frank had walked away, but it wasn't the same walk of indifference he had shown earlier. There was a sense of hesitation in his steps and uncertainty in his actions that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was too early to tell, but for Sarah, this moment marked the beginning of something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for. A change in her father. Perhaps this was just the start of a long journey, but for now, it was enough. Lily, though unsure of what the future held, could feel the hope in her heart grow. She had done something right. She had given a part of herself to Frank, and in return, she had received something unexpected. Something that made her believe that even the smallest gestures could break through the toughest of walls. The morning after Christmas, the house was quiet. The hustle and bustle of the holiday had passed, leaving behind an unusual stillness. It was as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift, but not sure what that something was. The family moved through the day in a muted silence, each person lost in their own thoughts, no one speaking of what had happened the night before. Lily and Sarah were the first to notice the small box sitting quietly on the doorstep. It hadn't been there the night before, and neither of them had heard anyone come by. There was no return address, no name attached, just a simple note written on the top. A gift for the little one. Lily's eyes widened in surprise as she carefully opened the box. Inside was an old-fashioned music box, its intricate rose carvings glinting softly in the light. The box was delicate, a work of art, something from another time. Lily's fingers touched the winding key, and as she turned it, the music began to play. The soft, nostalgic tune of Somewhere Over the Rainbow filled the room. The melody, so familiar yet so new, seemed to soothe her in a way she hadn't expected. Along with the music box was a small piece of paper. The note, written in a shaky hand, read, "Thank you, my girl. Don't ever forget that, no matter what, we are family." Lily paused as she read the words, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of understanding. She recognized the handwriting, even though it wasn't signed. This was from her grandfather, Frank. The gift, simple as it was, spoke volumes. It wasn't just a token, it was a sign of something shifting inside Frank. The change, though small, was undeniable. Lily felt a warm smile spread across her face. It wasn't about the gift itself, but about what it represented. A bridge being built, a relationship slowly healing. She held the music box tightly in her hands, a silent promise that perhaps things were starting to change, even if just a little. Sarah watched her daughter play with the music box, her own heart heavy with quiet emotion. She could see that Frank's view of their family was beginning to shift, but she also knew this was just the beginning. She didn't want to get her hopes up too high, but there was a small flicker of joy in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Frank didn't appear that day. He remained silent, his absence a subtle reminder of how far apart they all were. But the silence now felt different. It wasn't as cold as before. There was a slight warmth to it, a sense of waiting for something more to unfold. Chapter 6. A beautiful ending. The days after Christmas fell into a quiet rhythm. The house, though still, felt subtly different. There was a lightness in the air, a shift that hadn't been there before. Lily continued to play with the music box, the soothing notes providing her with comfort. Each time the melody played, she felt a small piece of hope settle in her chest. It was as though the song was a balm for her heart, easing the disappointment and confusion of the days before. Though she never mentioned her grandfather again, Lily couldn't help but feel that something was changing within him. Every time the music box played, she imagined him sitting somewhere, listening to the same tune, perhaps with the same quiet reflection. It wasn't much, but it was something. She smiled to herself, knowing that her small gesture had planted a seed of change, even if it hadn't yet bloomed fully. Sarah watched Lily with a quiet sense of peace. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close as they listened to the music. There was a warmth between them, a closeness that had been missing for so long. Sarah looked at Lily, her heart filled with love, and for the first time in a while, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. Though the family hadn't completely reconciled, Sarah knew that there was now a glimmer of understanding. The love they shared, though tested, was still there. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to begin rebuilding from. Christmas that year had been different. It wasn't about the gifts or the festivities, but about the small steps forward, the quiet moments of connection. The change hadn't been dramatic, but it had been real. Lily's gift, so simple yet profound, had broken through the coldness, and for that, Sarah was thankful. As Lily played with her music box, her gaze drifted to the clock on the wall. She wondered where Frank was, if he was thinking of her too. She didn't need him to say anything. The small change was enough. It was the beginning of something new, something beautiful. In the end, it's not the grand gestures or the perfect gifts that truly matter, but the quiet acts of love and understanding that can mend even the deepest rifts. Life is full of moments that test us, but it's in those moments we often find our greatest strength. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with patience, kindness, and a little hope, anything is possible. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more.